It's Colin Wolford here doing a talk from the base's HQ here in Devizes. And what I'm going to be talking about today is a controversial case of the alien autopsy. Hence the title of my presentation will be called The Alien Autopsy Conspiracy. And you may have heard of this if you've been around in the subject of ufology for a long time, or if you're quite new to it, then stand by, because I'm going to explain all the finer details of why I believe there's a conspiracy behind the alien autopsy footage. So let's get started then. We're talking about this man, Ray Santilli, and he claimed... Well, let's look at who Ray Santilli is. He was born 30th September 1955, Italian descent, no surprises there with that surname. He is a British musician, a record and film producer. He started in media in 1978 as an agent and manager for new wave and punk groups. In 85 he founded Music Broadcasting Services Limited, which secured the Walt Disney Audio Library in the UK. In 91 he founded the Merlin Group, who were involved with re-recording hits with the original artists. They also marketed and produced a number of television specials. In 95 he founded Orbital Media Group, a film and television production company. He was producer for what many consider the worst song of all time, the Birdie song by the Tweets. And apparently he actually did appear on the British music programme Top of the Pops, dressed up as one of those birdie type chicken things, and not sure if that's true or not, but that's the claim, and it wouldn't surprise me. So he's an entrepreneur basically, and he came across some intriguing footage, and this is the alien autopsy early timeline. So Ray Santilli and Gary Shoefield, who is his business partner, they visited Cleveland, Ohio in the United States back in, it was around the July the 4th weekend, July 1992. They were looking for music memorabilia. They returned with 18 separate clips of that music memorabilia with six sources, one being the AA Cameraman, the AA being the alien autopsy. So when I refer to the AA, I'm referring to the alien autopsy. Now, either DJ Bill Randall, who was quite a famous DJ at the time, or the original cameraman, was said to have sold footage to Ray of Elvis from the Pied Piper of Cleveland, which was a 1955 music documentary. It claimed the cameraman filmed both. This is actually one of the first appearances I've ever recorded footage of Elvis Presley. So obviously that's why Ray was motivated to go out there. He put adverts in the... Back then, we should remember there was no internet. We were talking about 1992. The internet was sort of kicking off 94, 95 in a big way. But back then, he would have put adverts in the local press for people to come forward with their rock memorabilia. So the cameraman, he wasn't actually based in Cleveland, Ohio, where his son was. So he was visiting his son, and he saw Ray's advert in the local paper requesting old movie footage. And the cameraman said he had something else he may be interested in, the Roswell film material. So there's some confusion here, and I should say that lots of people think when I'm talking about, it's been referred to as a Roswell film, the alien autopsy, and of course we should know all by now the famous Roswell crash, which is believed to happen kind of around the period of early July 1947, or we don't know exact dates. It could have been a number of crashes, and I do believe there was a number of crashes, but the confusion was that it was marketed as the Roswell footage because we had no other context of other UFO crash retrievals. So I mean, the cameraman did say that he did fly into Roswell, but it was actually he went on to say that this crash happened actually at the end of May 1947, and in Socorro, and not far from Magdalena. So there's some confusion begins there. So, and one of the things that people say they don't like, people say, well, it's not the Roswell beings, it's not this and that, because the aliens in the Roswell crash were these little Zeta type, grey type beings with 4 fingers, and obviously as we get into this, we'll see that this being was slightly bigger, I would say, and obviously had 6 fingers. So that's where the confusion begins. So I like to sort of separate that from the whole Roswell saga. So Ray flew to the cameraman's home. It was in Clearwater, Florida, because I think obviously all these footage was stored there at his house. Now Ray viewed footage of the alien autopsy and possibly others. There's been mentioned that has been made of a crash site with cranes and a recovery team. entities screaming and holding devices, and even Truman. This is quite a controversial part of the story, where claims were made that President Truman was expecting the scene or behind the viewing window. Even some sources have made that claim. So this all sort of came to light, and I'm just going to come out of this just because the embedded speed is a bit slower, so I'm just going to go into this. This was Reg Presley, and we'll get into Reg Presley later, but this first came to people's attention in 1995, early January, on a British TV morning show called Good Morning with Van and Nick. And let me just play this for you, and because this was, we'll get into, like I say, who Reg Presley was, but this is when it was first ever mentioned on national TV.
So, I mean, you actually present a programme on cable television, don't you?
That's right,
a
local TV station, that just goes out to about 3,000 homes.
Yeah, and they say you're very passionate about it.
I really, I'm well into it. I've been into this just to find out for myself, really, whether this is a genuine phenomena or whether it isn't. And the information that's come in is absolutely fantastic. In fact, I've got one for UFO buffs. Yeah. If you thought that the Roswell happening, where a crashed plane, crashed UFO crashed in New Mexico, if you think that you aren't going to find out about that, I have some great information, because I was speaking to Ray Santilli, who is a producer, the other day, who has just got hold of some film footage of the autopsy done on the aliens.
Hey, wait a second. Are you being serious?
I'm being very serious.
Now, wait a second. This happened in 1947 in
1947. They were over in America searching for some Elvis, old Elvis film.
Who's they?
Ray Santilli and his friend.
Yeah.
Just as film people.
Just as film people.
Yeah.
And they were trying, this old guy, about 76 he is now, and he said, if you think this Elvis Presley film's fantastic, what do you think about this? And from underneath his bed, he pulled out 15 cartridges of old film. And he said, I thought this was so important at the time that I made myself a copy, and I didn't tell anybody, and I've said nothing since.
Have you seen this?
I've seen the film, and the film has been broken off the end and analysed, and it's 1947 footage.
Yeah, and what does it show?
It shows an alien being worked on.
What, in an autopsy?
Yes,
what do you mean by humans?
By humans.
So you're talking about cover-up, really?
I'm talking about the biggest cover-up that's gone on this planet.
So you're saying that we humans managed to get hold of an alien and did an autopsy on him, and it was filmed?
Well, I've seen one. I believe there's another 3. There's 15 reels of this, so it's 150 minutes of debris, the actual craft itself.
How do you know it's an alien from what you've seen?
Because it doesn't look like you and I.
What does it look like?
It is longer than we are led to believe. We are led to believe that they were 4 foot. The one I have seen has to be 6 foot or more.
And Busty, don't you reckon that there are sort of aliens being held around the world in various places?
Oh yes, there's lots of information that seems to indicate that they've been around for a long time and the governments know all about it.
But do you think it would have come out somewhere? I mean, you can't have every government in the world.
Yeah, but it's coming out slowly now, Nick. A lot of UFO programs that have been on recently are pointing the way. Michael Aspel's program, Strange But True, was all about the Rendlesham Forest. You see in the headline there, it was Strange But True.
Oh, that's Busty, of course, if you know who Busty Taylor is. He's into his crop circles, like Reg was as well, actually. They were both very much interested in crop circles, but this happened, the crop circle stuff was happening around that time as well, obviously the early 90s, and a lot of the researchers went hand in hand, investigating this subject. So let's look again at the timeline, and there was said to be 22 reels of 16mm film, each 3 minutes long, and a scrap reel of a further 10 minutes. They'll basically the payment, because the cameraman, the story being that the cameraman needed money to finance his, I think it was his granddaughter's wedding, and down payment was for the footage made in '92, which I would imagine came from Santilli's own funds, but there was rumours the cameraman wanted $100,000. Volker Spielberg, who we'll get into, no relation to Steven Spielberg, although that again caused many people some amusement at the time. He helps out. He's another man involved in music, and we'll talk a little bit about him later. He helps put the rest of the money at a later date. So Ray Santilli contacts BFORA, which is the British UFO research organisation, and their investigator at the time was Philip Mantle, who is now one of the top researchers, I would say, in terms of looking into this alien autopsy. Not the only one by any means, and there was a number of other researchers around the world, but certainly in England, you would have probably heard of Philip Mantle if you've studied the subject of UFOs over the years. And in the summer of '93, Ray contacted him and asked would he be interested in making a UFO documentary. In later weeks, he would say he has footage of a UFO crash at Roswell and autopsies of the creatures. So it seemed that Ray really didn't know anything about the subject, and he even was implying, that it was Roswell. So it kind of gives you the idea that he was kind of clueless. He was a businessman. He didn't know what he got hold of, and obviously he was out of his depth in terms of what it was he actually got hold of, but he knew it was highly interesting and very controversial. So Philip wanted to see the footage, but Ray kept stalling and saying later. Philip met Ray for the first time in '94 during a BFORA lecture. Now Ray had an office nearby. He tells Philip the same story about the cameraman and how he wants to release the footage. But time goes by, so November '94 comes along. Money is finally secured to buy the cameraman's footage, and we believe that was from Volker Spielberg. So January '95, as you've just seen, Reg Presley first mentions the alien autopsy on the Good Morning with Ann and Nick breakfast show. And in February, March '95, Philip remembers Ray after viewing the Roswell TV film, which you may remember of Cole McLachlan, I think Paul David's film that came out around '94. So that was already, being back in the news again. Roswell's been around, since the late '70s, the whole story. But there was there's this made-for-TV film, very good film if you've not seen that, Paul David's production. And he contacts him once again, so he drives down to his office and he finally shows some film, but it's a tent footage, and that is what you may have you've just seen on the actual Good Morning show. He was actually referring to the tent footage, so he talks about these beings look very tall and things like that. So he's actually not actually seen the famous footage that we all know about today. He was actually talking about the tent footage, which we'll go into in a minute, what the actual tent footage is. So over the next couple of months, he would be shown 2 autopsies and the debris footage. So this is one of the big controversial subjects on this, that a lot of people don't know that there's another autopsy, which only half a dozen researchers saw, maybe 4 or 5 people. And of course, that was of a similar length, 15 minutes, of a being with its leg intact. As you may know, if you've seen the autopsy, the leg is damaged. It looked like it's been burnt or something's happened to it, part of the crash, if you believe it's real. Of course, I'm coming across the angle that it is real, but there's going to be people out there who say, oh, it was all a hoax. But it still causes a huge debate even today on YouTube. If you watch, you can watch the footage on YouTube for free. So May the 5th is another important date, '95. It was shown at the Museum of London to about 150 invited guests. Some of them, obviously, are ufologists, and some people weren't invited. I'm a bit, upset about that. But August 19th was Ray allows principal investigator Philip Mantle to show it at the Sheffield BFORA conference. And Ray's original plan was to sell the footage only on video, but it spiraled out of control. So I do generally believe that it totally got out of control. Everyone wanted to know about this footage. It sounded too good to be true. But you could see that, like a lot of his sort of schemes, Ray would have marketed it to video, but it did sort of get out of control, basically. Such was the desire for people to see this, for themselves and make up their own mind. And the other famous date in the autopsy timeline, of course, is August 28th, '95, which was when Channel 4 and various broadcasters around the world, such as France, America, showed various documentaries. The one on Channel 4 was called The Roswell Incident, and you can still watch that online. It was mainly about the Roswell crash. Again, it's the confusion with the whole Roswell incident, but the footage was actually shown towards the end. They kind of shoehorned it in because all this story was kicking off around that time. So the cameraman then, so he's an interesting person because he didn't want any, his main thing he didn't want was the anonymity of him, not his name not coming out, and obviously people wanted more of a background story, because if he did make this footage, he did, film this footage, then obviously there's a backstory there, and that would give more credibility. And there was a statement forthcoming which came out, I think, not long after, or just before the actual showing of the footage, around that time period, August. And so I'm going to just read from the cameraman statement, because it is very important. It's one of the important aspects, that he's given names and pieces to the story. And he calls it Operation Anvil. So he actually got a name for it, so that's a name you can look up. We haven't found out what actually Operation Anvil is, but obviously it was very highly secret, and the fact that he's given a name to it, gives him some extra credibility, I think. So here we go. So he says, I joined the forces in March of 1942, and I left in 1952. The 10 years I spent serving my country was some of the best years of my life. My father was in the movie business, which meant he had good knowledge about the workings of cameras and photography. For this reason, I believe I passed a medical that would not normally allow me in due to polio as a child. After my enrolment and training, I was able to use my camera skills and became one of the few dedicated cameramen in the forces. I was sent to many places, and it was wartime. I fast learnt the ability of filming under difficult circumstances. I will not give more detail on my background, only to say that in the fall of 1944 I was assigned to intelligence, reporting to the Assistant Chief of Air Staff. I was moved around depending on the assignment. During my time I filmed a great deal, including the tests of White Sands, which is the Manhattan Project, and the Trinity, for the atomic bomb, which is a very interesting part of this story. I remember very clearly receiving the call to go to White Sands, which is in Roswell. I had not long returned from St. Louis, Missouri, where I had filmed the new ramjet, which was known as the Little Henry experimental aircraft. It was June the 1st, 1947, when McDonald, and some pictures on the screen which we'll go into, when McDonald asked me to report to General McMullen for a special assignment. You can see there General McMullen on your left. I had no experience of working with McMullen, but after talking to him for a few minutes, I knew that I would never wish to be his enemy. McMullen was straight to the point, no messing. I was ordered to a crash site just southwest of Socorro. It was urgent, and my brief was to film everything in sight, not to leave the debris until it had been removed, and I was to have access to all areas of the site. If the commander in charge had a problem with that, I was told to get them to call McMullen. A few minutes after my orders from McMullen, I received the same instructions from Tui, who you can see there on the right, saying it was a crash of a Russian spy plane. 2 generals in one day. This job was important. I flew out from Andrews with 16 other officers and personnel, mostly medical. We arrived at Wright-Patterson and collected more men and equipment. From there we flew to Roswell on a C-54. When we got to Roswell, we were transported by road to the site. When we arrived, the site had already been cordoned off. From the start, it was plain to see this was no Russian spy plane. It was a large disc, flying saucer on its back, with heat still radiating from the ground around it. This is illustrations taken from the book Beyond Roswell, which I can highly recommend. The commander on site handed over to the SAC medical team, who were still waiting for Kenny to arrive. However, nothing had been done, as everyone was just waiting for orders. It was decided to wait until the heat subsided before moving in, as fire was a significant risk. That was made all the worse by the screams of the freak creatures that were lying by the vehicle. And he uses this term freak creatures, which is something, people don't usually use this word too much nowadays, but I think it gives this story credibility. That's sort of someone from back in the 1920, however old, I think he was 80 at this time when he gave this account, 82. What in God's name they were, no one could tell, but one thing's for sure, they were circus freaks, creatures with no business here. Each had hold of a box, which they kept hold of in both arms close to their chests. They just lay there crying, holding those boxes, as you can see in the diagram. Now, once my tent had been set up, I started filming immediately. First the vehicle, then the site and debris. At around 0600 it was deemed safe to move in. Again, the freaks were still crying, and then when approached they screamed even louder. They were protective of their boxes, but we managed to get one loose with a firm strike at the head of a freak with the butt of a rifle. The 3 freaks were dragged away and secured with rope and tape. The other one was already dead. The medical team were reluctant at first to go near these freaks, but as they some were injured, they had no choice. Once the creatures were collected, the priority was to collect all debris that could be removed easily, as there was still a risk of fire. This debris seemed to come from exterior struts that were supporting a very small disc on the underside of the craft, which must have snapped off when the disc flipped over. The debris was taken to tent stations for logging, then loaded onto trucks. After 3 days, a full team from Washington came down and the decision was taken to move the craft. Inside it, because he claims he actually went inside it, the atmosphere was very heavy. It was impossible to stay in longer than a few seconds without feeling very sick. Therefore, it was decided to analyse it back at base. So it was loaded onto a flat top and taken to Wright-Patterson, which is where I joined it. I stayed at Wright-Patterson for a further 3 weeks, working on the debris. I was then told to report to Fort Worth in Dallas for the filming of an autopsy. Normally I would not have a problem with this, but it was discovered that the freaks may be a medical threat. Therefore, I was required to wear the same protective suits as the doctors. It was impossible to handle the camera properly. Loading and focusing was very difficult. In fact, against orders, I removed my suit during the filming. The first 2 autopsies took place in July of 1947. After filming, I had several hundred reels. I separated problem reels which required special attention in processing. These I would do later. The first batch was sent through to Washington and I processed the remainder a few days later. Once the remaining reels had been processed, I contacted Washington to arrange collection of the final batch. And he was actually told, he said later, that he was only to mention it if someone mentioned it to him first. Incredibly, they never came to collect or arrange transportation for them. I called many times and they just gave up. The footage has remained with me ever since. In May of 1949, I was asked to film the 3rd autopsy. So he seems like he claims he filmed 3 autopsies, and who did the first one, we're not quite sure on where that actually happened, but he did 2, 3 and 4, so that's worth remembering. Okay. So now you can see the sign of the Army Recovery Team, or how it would have looked, and these tent stations, which is relevant when we look at the debris footage later. So let's go back to the main characters who were around at that time, and as you've just seen, well, you see 2 of them just a minute ago. That's Reg and Busty on your left there, and then of course Philip Mantle, who was working. He was with before at the time, and he was one of the principal investigators of the alien autopsy. So who is Reg? Because he's an important person in this story in many ways. So his name, he was born in Reginald Morris Ball, 1941. He did sadly die in 2013. Lead singer with the 1960 bands The Trogs, who you may remember from all their hit songs like Wild Thing, and of course Reg's song Love Is All Around was covered by Wet Wet Wet, and that got to #1 in the charts in May '94, spending an incredible 15 weeks there. So this is interesting. This is all happening around, and he used his money to fund his own research. Reg, the money he made from his back catalogue and that success of that song. So Reg became interested in crop circles back in the summer of 1990. Reg's manager had contacted Ray Santilli around Christmas '94 about a Trogs reissue, and Ray tells him if Reg would be interested in seeing film footage of an alien autopsy. Reg was sent the tent footage, but he is not impressed. So we'll get into the tent footage in a moment, and Ray tells him, "You haven't seen the best footage yet, and as soon as I have time, I'll invite you up to see more." And he began telling him what he'd see, because he was at this time obviously processing the film, if you believe it, obviously that he was generating film, that is. Reg then goes on to describe the tent footage on live TV on the Anna Nick show to 17 million viewers. He mentions Ray's name, and within 8 hours the news has gone around the world. It was not till April that Reg finally viewed the famous footage we all know. So there's a still picture from the tent footage, which is very grainy, and you just make out very sort of poor. If you can actually see bits of this on YouTube, but it's totally a long way from being what we know as good the quality as the more famous alien autopsy. So what we know about the tent footage was that in the summer of '94, it's claimed that Ray approached Arc Music Studios to enhance some footage he has of aliens that was of a poor quality. They can't, but music producer Keith Bateman, along with others, go around making their own. It's filmed in a barn in Bedfordshire and pretends to show an emergency autopsy. Andy Price, Watt's 12-year-old son, played the alien with his head covered by sheet and a dummy alien head on top, and he had bits of orange peel for eyes. Now, Bruce Barlow, whose USO documentary included 2 minutes of the footage as a bonus on their video Reasons to Believe, claims that Keith was asked by Ray to make some footage that could be used as a reconstruction of an alien autopsy for a documentary. Feeling being that Ray was wanting to know if something like this could be reproduced, the footage he'd seen. Now, GMTV, they're interested in showing it, and Ray, upon hearing about it, flies back from his holiday to angrily confront Keith and Andy and offer them £5,000 not to go ahead, as it will ruin his release of, you know, the famous alien autopsy footage. Now, they eventually agree. So Ray would later sell all the footage to the fact or fiction people, to Keith's anger. Ray denies paying for the footage to be made and thought it a load of rubbish, and if you have seen it, then you know he's quite a savvy businessman, and he would know that that doesn't compare with the alien autopsy in any way, and it's just, you know, I just find it bizarre. But we have to address it because it was obviously some confusion as to why this was being promoted at the time, when, you know, we had potentially, you know, this other footage coming to light. So how did that get muddied into the subject? Was Ray using the tent footage as a stopgap until his real footage arrived, which I believe he was, or was it even attempts to muddy the waters early on, which again I believe is the case? So Keith Bateman, who was like the guy behind this footage, and a couple of others, he says when the footage was released, we suspected our phones were being tapped, and there's a night I was called to the alarm system at AK Music where it appeared nothing had been touched, but we later realised files had been disturbed and tapes moved. Also, Santilli had told me that he had been asked quite a few questions from certain authorities. So it's kind of interesting, if there's nothing to the alien autopsy subject, why has there been break-ins and some other things that I'll be going into? If there's nothing to it, why are people trying to break in? And should make you think a bit more deeper about it. And Santilli had this to say about the tent footage, but I think is quite important as well. On June 17th, 98, he made a statement and he said, the tent footage was the first film material I collected from the Cameraman. It was in the form of 16mm film and in very poor condition. I brought it back to England and asked the studio facility in Buckinghamshire to retrieve whatever image they could from it. A few weeks after delivery, the studio presented me with a film which has become known as the tent footage. I was told that this was all that could be retrieved from the film, so this is interesting. He's thinking that this footage is actually from the early copies, you know, conversion from the footage onto VHS. Now, I had informed the cameraman by telephone we were able to retrieve some images, and indeed showed the film to Philip Mantle and other interested parties. I returned to the States later to collect the main film and showed the tent footage on VHS to the cameraman. At this point, he stated that he did not remember either the image being portrayed or the style in which it had been filmed. I was concerned, but collected the remaining film, which was in far better condition, and returned to the UK. Upon my return, I contacted the studio and found out more about the images from the tent footage. I got the impression that, as a joke, the film had been interfered with, but nobody was owning up. This meant that with regard to the tent footage, I was uncertain as to what was real and what was not, and if the film had been interfered with, I could not use it. This is why I completely pulled back from using the film. So there does seem to be an early attempt here at sort of making him look like a bit of a fool, really. That I actually think that was the idea, to sort of show this piece of footage, that he was told that these images came back from the cameraman's first reels that were being transferred over, so he just didn't really question it. But I think they were got to, basically, and I think that was intercepted, and that was done to muddy the water and also to make him look sort of, you know, unreliable as in his story. An early attempt at some sort of foul play, if you like. So that's Volker Spielberg with Ray Santilli, and he put up allegedly the money for the Alien Autopsy film, because obviously if it was $100,000, you know, that's a serious amount of money. Even though I'm sure Ray, you know, was doing all right for money, and he put up, you know, the deposit himself. He did need a financer, and that's courtesy of Maurizio Beata, who's a prominent alien autopsy researcher. And of course, at the time, I was heavily into UFOs subject. I'd been following it since 1990, and in the local UFO magazines, Quest magazine, UFO magazine, there was obviously the drive for the footage to be marketed was full swing, and as you see from this advert, I mean, going back to 95, this is no way like a cheap product to pay for VHS. Back in 95, it was £33, and rather naively, maybe I was first to write out a cheque for that, and it's quite a rare VHS video. It's actually got the original footage on it, and a documentary with the likes of Clifford Stone and some other notable people. But they did a little film in Roswell, and were trying to link it with the Roswell thing. But as I say, I don't think it was anything to do with the more famous Roswell crash, but another crash that the cameraman said happened in May 31st, 1947. So obviously, if you're cynical, you could say, well, this is all a big money-making scam, and it's all just done to generate money. But obviously, he knew the value of what he had, and that's how he presented it. So at the time, then, August 28th, the big TV show was Fact or Fiction, and that was being shown on Fox TV by Robert Kiviat. It was hosted by Star Trek's Jonathan Frakes. You may remember Riker in Star Trek Next Generation series, and Time magazine said that it had sparked a debate not seen since the Zapruder film, which was obviously the footage of JFK being shot. So it's no doubt about it, it's still arguably, it's called, by people who believe it's a hoax, it's the greatest hoax of all time. And if you've seen the footage, you know, no one's ever been able to recreate the alien autopsy footage. Now, Fox rebroadcast the programme twice, each time to higher ratings, with its November broadcast winning its time slot with 11.7 million viewers. Included an analysis by noted forensic pathologist Cyril Vecht and special effects makeup artist Stan Winton. So this was a big deal. This is generating huge audience figures and huge publicity around the world. So, you know, if you're going to have something straight up to scrutiny, you're going to have to, and put it across to millions of people. That's quite a bold hoax if you're going to pull it off. That's, you know, that's really, of course, my take is that the footage was a genuine piece of footage, and that's why it survived all the scrutiny until something happened in 2006, which we'll get to. So there you see Cyril, and that's a still from the documentary, and he's Cyril thought they were more surgeons than pathologists. Now, a surgeon being a doctor who is trained to perform medical operations, while a pathologist examines a dead body and cuts it open to see how they died. Because there was some claims that these people high up in the, if you believe the Majestic 12 claims, likes of Vannevar Bush and Detlev Bronk, you know, they were actually surgeons rather than pathologists. So we're going to do a little video from Dr. Roger Lear, who you may not know, or he's sadly again another person who's no longer with us. But he obviously he was a surgeon, and he deals with implants of from alien abductees and things like that. But he had some views on the alien autopsy as well. So.
So start just by telling us your name and your role in the UFO community.
Well, my name is Dr. Roger Lear, and I have been removing objects from individuals who allege alien abduction. These are three-dimensional objects that we find in the bodies of people who say they've been abducted, and then when these things are removed, we submit them for scientific analysis. And I've done 13 cases to date. The last one we did just a couple of weeks ago.
So what has the reaction been?
SEAL labs and all this always reprint, the scientific reports. So if you don't like the message, don't kill the messenger.
I know this probably isn't your area of specialty, but one of the things we're investigating is how people feel about the alien autopsy footage. Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, yes, I do. I was in on it from almost the beginning. I interviewed Ray Santilli in London, and he said that he was in the music business, and he evidently is in the music business. I know what the current thoughts, that the body, was a construct made by a special effects artist. I'm sorry, but I don't believe it. I think somebody is taking credit for something they didn't do. That's my personal opinion. Now, I sat with about 17 other physicians when this came out, and we looked at it. We didn't recognize the internal organs either, surgeons or myself. But the techniques that were used to dissect the body are real techniques that we're trained to use in taking apart a human body. And those are they're little idiosyncrasies that if a cameraman was to film it and then have guidance from a special effects artist to build a dummy, they would have to have a tremendous amount of background knowledge. I mean, the money that would have to be spent to do something like this would be far more than what you would get out of it. And another one of the shots in the autopsy film, when the leg is raised and the knee is bent, if you look at it frame by frame, you'll see that the thigh externally rotates. Well, this is how it works in a human being. So again, in order to do this in an artificial way, you would have to employ the services of a kinesiologist, so that in 4 frames of the film, it would be so intricate you'd have to show the external rotation of the thigh. Well, again, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense to me. And again, you ask my personal opinion. I think that this may have been a training film that maybe some branch of the military was using for training physicians in the field, that when they came upon crash sites, and there was bodies, this is what would happen. So I don't know. I don't think anybody will know truly until something happens down the line.
So as a physician, you feel like the procedures were really too accurate for it to be a hoax?
Exactly. It's just the techniques that were used for dissection and the way the tissues came apart. Now, I'm working on a large screen film on the UFO subject in some of my work, and it's not a documentary, it's an entertainment film. But I'm well aware of what special effects artists can do. And for example, to make blood, you have instruments like a blood knife, and when you cut, it releases liquid that looks like blood. If you look again closely at this film, the blood that you see on the film, or whatever is supposed to be blood, does not come out of the knife. It comes from the inside of the tissues. So again, if you would have to be a true genius in the creation of an entity in which you could put little maybe latex blood vessels and have some fluid come out. And it's just too much work for what they got out of it.
And are many of your colleagues in the scientific community, are they in agreement on this?
Well, let's not say the scientific community, because the scientific community doesn't have much to do with subjects like this. But the medical community that is associated with me, that looked at the film, all was in agreement that they didn't know what it was, and that it did not represent something that we know is common pathology. You can have, for example, the multidactyly, more than one finger. One of the things that happens in nature when you have multidactyly is that you'll find one of two things. Either one finger is a clone of another. In other words, if we had two second fingers, that one would be exactly the same length as the other. If we look at the parabola of fingers on a human hand, it has a parabola. Fingers are not the same size. So when these things happen in nature as a mutation or a congenital defect, you would either see two that would be the same size, or the other kind is just a little stump of a digit that's left, and the stump can be amputated, and then the hand or the foot will appear normal. In the film, when they showed both the hand and the foot, there was a perfect parabola of the 6 digits. So that's another thing that's sort of strange.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I can say that my advice, my 2 cents, is that if you come across anybody, either in the field of ufology or government or in some other area that claims to be an expert on any of this stuff, and they'll tell you the answers, and you'll say definitively something, this is the way it is, my advice is to put a finger in each ear and run as fast as you can.
Thank you.
That was the late, great Roger Lear. And what's interesting is that interview was actually done in 2007, which, you know, if you go along with the hoax thing, came out a year before that. So he was still saying that and giving credibility to it. And I value Mr. Lear, and got a lot of time for him. And I think that's very important to take that on board, what he said there. And of course, he wasn't the only person regarding surgeons. I mean, he did divide some people, surgeons. And in October '95, Italian ufologist Maurizio Baiata, he organised a private viewing of the Santilli footage with 2 Italian leading autopsy technicians, Cesare, who's now deceased, and Massimo Signoracchi, which was his son. Now, of the 2 technicians, the youngest, Massimo, had already seen the material. He felt the being in the film was neither human nor a dummy. This reflects the opinion of Pierluigi Baima Belloni, a professor of pathological anatomy at the University of Turin. Cesare says, "As for my opinion, in keeping with that of other pathologists, I am in favour of the hypothesis that it is not a human being in the order of 70%. What I do not think is that it is a human being in the autopsy." So these people have put a lot of hours in, and I'm no expert on autopsies. I mean, I did, you know, in researching this subject over the last few years, I've looked at a few human autopsies, and when something dies, when that spirit's gone out of it, it does look almost like a prop, almost unreal, and it's worth bearing that in mind. So let's go on to how this film was actually filmed. Supposedly, according to Cameraman, it was a Bell & Howell 16mm Filmo camera, much like you see in that photo there. So we're going to go on the actual footage itself. Now, I don't normally do this, but I'm just going to show, I have a beta copy of the footage. It's sort of kind of corrupted, but it's good enough for me to at least show you a little minute of the clip to give you before I go into some of the photos. It's a much better quality image of the alien autopsy. So it's just like, kind of loops around in a minute or so, but you know, this was quite highly disturbing at the time for people watching it, and it still draws a lot of debate on YouTube, and you know, just as you can see, it's a far better version that you may be familiar with on YouTube, and getting the hopefully a non-corrupted version shortly. So there's lots of things going on in this table. There's a being, you know, you can see various props, autopsy tools. There's many very, you know, if this is a hoax, this is very well done by any standards. I think, you know, the claims of people like special effects experts have views, but I was always going to be interested of what the you know, pathologists and the people who actually deal with dead bodies would say over special effects artists. Not that special effects artists opinions aren't valid in this case. And that's a very controversial bit you may have just seen, of a strange little crystal type thing coming out of the body. So I just wanted to show you this as an exclusive to this live version that many people wouldn't have seen before. A far superior quality footage. So we go back to the actual autopsy then, and that's again a still from that footage. So was it an alien entity? I mean, it looked like something not of this world. There's certainly some anomalies there with the body, and well, was it a cunning hoax? Because you may be or may not be aware that some people have claimed that it was all a hoax. Surely not. Why would they say such a thing? But is it? It may well be a hoax. Am I wrong? Am I right? So just a picture as how it would look standing up. I mean, it's a very unusual body, muscular. It's kind of very strange. I mean, if this was something that was created, it's highly unusual. It certainly didn't fit the whole, as I say earlier, about the Roswell crash with the Zeta, if we assume that they were Zeta Reticuli beings, the Greys as we're called. These ones looked slightly bigger. They had, as I say, 6 fingers. They didn't have 4 fingers like that, and they had these very strange distended stomach. They had no navel, so obviously the idea that these weren't born beings, these were cloned type beings. And you can see the gleam from the lights in the lab they set up for the autopsy, how bright, which would obviously you would need for an autopsy. You can see the glare of how bright it is on the body, but you know, this did freak a lot of people out. People actually thought this was actually, and still do, some people think it was actually a real human body, but that was carved up and, you know, bits added to it, which is not totally as crazy as it sounds. Actually, I think that's got more relevant than the idea that it's a hoax myself. So you can see the damage there, and some of the autopsy table, got Bunsen burner, got test tubes. I guess the sort of thing what you would expect, but this was going back in the 1940s, and how many of us were, you know, peak age back then, and we've moved on a bit now. This is, you know, 70 years actually, isn't it now? So 2017, we just had the 70th anniversary of, I was out in Roswell, but highly interesting props, bits and pieces. You know, if it's a hoax, it's very well done. And people say, oh, it goes out of focus, and you can watch the footage, which is about 15 minutes long on YouTube and bits. But there's a lot of stuff that doesn't go out of focus, and there's a lot of stuff that is very graphic. And you think, well, if you're going to hoax something, why would you, you know, it would be far easier to make a short hoax and do 15 minutes of, and this was, remember, as I said earlier, there was another autopsy as well, and also the debris footage, which we haven't got into yet. So there's a scene where he we assume it was a man and a woman. We know that there was a woman there as well, which we'll maybe discuss later. But the removal of this lens type thing, there's all sorts of claims by people like Colonel Corso, who you may remember did the day after Roswell, which for myself, I think there was some disinfo there, but I think there was a lot of truth in that as well, that a lot of these technologies were reverse engineered, and they were given to places like Wright-Patterson and back engineered. So I think a lot of our technology today is actually a result of that. That's not to put down the you know, the geniuses who work in these places. I think it's actually just as amazing that people can back engineer from highly advanced technology. So I'm not taking anything away from you know, the endeavours of humans. So yeah, when he took off the lens, then you could actually see this big pupil. And so again, this is all very elaborate, hard. You know, this is going to cost a lot of money. You know, I'm not a special effects expert, and it seems very, very, you know, detailed, graphic. Obviously, it's black and white. People say, well, why is it black and white? But there were a lot of military films that were in black and white. It wasn't such a surprise. I mean, yeah, it would have been more interesting if it was in colour. You might find that suspicious. It's worth making that point. But if you remember the story I read out, you know, at the beginning of the Cameraman statement, he referred to about the soldier hitting one in the butt of, with the butt of the rifle in the head, and And you can actually, it's not so as clear as the footage I was showing you, but you could actually see this marking on the head, so it does seem to at least tie in with that part of the story. And obviously the mouth is fixed. It seems like they know, as if they've outgrown the use of speech, and I believe a lot of these beings are telepathic now, but that's not to say they wouldn't still have mouth cavities and stuff, and obviously the greys, you always hear about like a little slit for mouth. Or interesting ears, quite low set there, quite low down. Again, the nose is interesting, I find very interesting again. You might have seen this a minute ago where they took this very peculiar, I mean, if it was a hoax, why are you putting these strange little, it's like a prism crystal type thing, where he's actually, surgeon puts his finger in this, and it's very bizarre, and apparently that was also seen on the first autopsy as well. So a female, it certainly looked female, because as you can see, it's got what would have seemed to be a vagina, and distended stomach. Some people thought they were like pregnant, but I don't think that's the case. It may be that there was other reasons. It could have been, I actually think these beings actually died not long before this autopsy was actually performed. I think they literally had just died, and that's why some claims about how the blood, shouldn't drip. So, but I think these were literally had just died, these beings. This was probably one we know died at the crash site, and I guess the two died not long after that, and then one, as the cameraman says, lived on a bit longer. And you can actually see there on the left of the arm, or the right arm of the being, it's almost been totally cut, whether that was from the crash or some injury, possibly shot at by the soldiers. So you have other things going on in the room then. So you have a curious sort of, that thing in the middle there is the microphone, which you can hit. You can't, obviously there's no sound on the footage, but he's actually giving the instructions to the gentleman, the doctor, surgeon, behind that viewing window. And people say, well, why is he hiding behind that mask? And it's gonna, it would reveal everything, so it's convenient that. But the fact is that you can actually make out some of the facial features of this person, and the nose, the shoulders. There's actually a lot of detail you can see. I don't have a problem with the fact that the surgeons are wearing these, biohazard suits, whatever. Because you're dealing with these pathogens and all sorts of diseases, you don't know what's going on, and you can actually see this. I'll just maybe post that up towards the danger sign. You got a telephone with a curly wire, so that was controversial at the time. People were saying, well, they didn't have curly phones back then. This is all just, it's not a good hoax, but actually, not quite. So what did the danger sign say? Because I think that was an important thing, and I'd sort of, when I was re-examining. Basically what happened was I wanted to get back into the alien autopsy because it had been on my mind as a ufologist for a long time, and I was quite surprised that no one had reopened the investigation, or I know Philip sort of comes down now on the idea that it's all a hoax, but I started up a page on Facebook, which you can just do a quick plug for that, the Alien Autopsy Analysis Facebook page, and it was mainly to the anniversary, the 20th anniversary in 2015 of the first showing of it. So I wanted to reopen an investigation because I wasn't happy. Basically, there's too much smoke and claims. There's something more. There's some data missing here. But let me go back to this danger sign then. So one of the things that would be interesting, of course, would be what does this danger sign actually say? And I've actually, just by scrutinising it on I think it was on my iPhone, and you could actually make out what it actually says, which there were some vague references in the book, I think, beyond Roswell, but I think I pretty much nailed it, which is maximum working time. If you read the top line there, maximum working, and then the next line down time, and then it looks like some numbers. It possibly could be something that's like of 4 hours. That's definitely hours there, and below that would seem to be some phone number to ring or something. So this is all very interesting. If this is a hoax, why is all this information in there? Because if you are working in a lab, then I would imagine there would be a certain time, especially if you're dealing with biohazard type stuff. So yeah, that's the curly phone, and they weren't around then apparently. That was the claim at the 95, but actually no, that's not the case. So the researchers found that there was curly flex cord. It was dated to 1946. And that's an image from Beyond Roswell again, the book by Michael Hessman and co-written partially by Philip Mental. Very good. You can get that book for a couple of pounds, literally online, on eBay, whatever, Amazon. Very well. If you're interested in the alien autopsy and looking more into the, I'd say that's the book to get, in my opinion. So very interesting, a telephone with a curly wire. And there's also other things going on. You can watch the footage yourself. It's well worth repeat viewings. There's, people. I still watch it, and there's still little things. If you concentrate on a little part of the screen, you can see things. When you're not looking on another part. And obviously, one of the things, sadly, a bit like the Ramey memo, if you remember, how they were trying to decode what was written on that piece of paper. There's intriguing again. Like there's some doctor's notes here or surgeon's notes, and we can't quite make out what's being said there. But it's interesting that they're making notes. Obviously, putting in weights of various organs, perhaps, and other things. So it was very graphic for me, a hoax. I mean, it was even pixelated on the American one, the sexual organs. That's how life, they believed it would cause, quite a shock. Because obviously you wouldn't be showing a human autopsy on TV because that would upset people. But if you show an alien autopsy, then it's sort of it doesn't seem quite as bad, which is kind of sad, really, because I feel like these beings are, all God's creatures. Really, we're all part of, an expression of creation, and it can be quite disturbing, really, to actually analyse this footage, the fact that these things are going on. I believe they have been going on from as far back as the 1930s, even autopsies, and it is, you think how they could, people say, how would they cover it up, but we all live in our little boxes, and things that, we know how space is patrolled and crashes. There has been other crash retrievals, and we could talk about Aztec later, or maybe other like the Cape Girardeau 1941 case. So these things were going on, and obviously there's very unusual organs going on here. So what's these strange rounded parts of all these kidneys and God knows what. So very unusual, very graphic thing to make. I mean, there's been claims that this is all hoax and this is all offal and things like that, which we'll be getting into later. Skull cap being removed, again very graphic with a sort of like a hacksaw type thing. If you're squeamish, you might not want to see that. But then if you think it's a hoax, then but if it's real, then that's quite disturbing to see. And of course, we talked about the first autopsy, and there was a second, and the more famous one is obviously the one that was released. And we'll go back into why the first autopsy never saw the light of day. But there was debris footage which came to about 2 minutes, which, again, if you're going to make props and stuff, you've got a whole lots of stuff going on here. You got these, I guess, H-beams, I think they call them, which, we not to be confused with the Roswell, the I-beam type stuff, but again, very interesting images. And of course, people say, well, what links that then with the autopsy footage? Well, simply the fact that you got 6-finger panels there, and the claim was that, if you remember, the cameraman statement was that these freaks were screaming out and holding on to these boxes, and whether they were the control panel for the craft, and were they operating this craft by some sort of mental telepathy, I think it's very valid, and there's been talk about that. What is quite hard to do would be to cut one right down the middle and then go to the effort. Some people have said that the panel on the right is like wires and sort of circuitry and all sorts coming out, and there's obviously the claims that Bell Labs were back engineering stuff in the 1940s. So again, if you can actually see the actual panels itself, there's like little depressions where the hands are, and lots of little nodules where they seem to sort of be interfacing with the panels and possibly controlling the craft. That's if you believe it's genuine, of course. So you've got these tables set out and what looked like a gas mask on that pole. So we saw the tent stations in the diagram, but there's a lot of things to be made here. If you're gonna, why go to the effort of making debris as well as the 2 autopsies, And what happened to all the other footage? Of course, that's another thing. And everything was tagged, and you can see the tags on it, and there's a soldier, so we can see someone else. We don't see his face, but again, what we do see is his hands, and that's something that's worth mentioning, because I'm going to bring that up. So yeah, I-beam, H-beam, so with strange hieroglyphics. Very unusual. And there's been claims that obviously this writing is sort of Sumerian or Atlantean, not going back. All sorts of claims about what this writing says, which we can go into. That was a still footage, not seen in the footage, but actually it was found actually, because I know Rai Uno, there's a clip and I put it on the page where you can actually briefly see a little segment of this soldier. This was never on the English footage, which is kind of a curious thing, but this still, I think Ray said it was quite bad quality, and they were able to retrieve this image, but you can actually see it on the Rai Uno alien autopsy program from '95, very briefly, of the soldier holding it up. So, what was the public reaction to the May the 5th screening? Because that was when it was first probably shown. The reaction of the audience was mixed. Some thought the film was a fake. A few whispered their belief that it might be real. Others simply weren't sure. But few, if any, laughed at some 18 minutes of film purporting to show the dissection of a non-human entity. London-based writer and renowned crop circle creator Robert Irvine wrote in the 14 Times, perhaps the strangest of all was the sight of that awkward mix of known believers in the ET hypothesis, known disbelievers, believed fakers of it, innocent ostentationists, and the downright disingenuous, all hissing hoax at a piece of evidence that seemed to me as impressive as I've ever seen. And that's quite, high praise coming from him. But never in my lifetime had I expected to witness the subsequent cooperation between traditional adversaries, all seemingly galvanised into an unprecedented gush of agreement, adopting what one of them called a proper sceptical attitude that the film was a transparent fraud. For whoever is responsible for the film has now provided ufologists for what I assume they had always wanted, firm, enticingly inconclusive evidence that something out there has somehow got here. I do agree with that. I think it was actually, when the lights went down, people weren't sort of laughing in the aisles or anything like that. It was, right, could this be real? And if it is, then suddenly, hang about, this is going on in the 40s, the aliens are real, so it's going to really screw with your mind, and that might explain why, the whole cover-up, they don't want... If you've got evidence of this calibre, this could actually change the world overnight. And I think it was a massive breach. It was a huge thing, and it's something that they had to cover up. But let's go back to the story where Colin Andrews and Ray and Reg, they see the rare first autopsy screening in April 26th, May 95. And there's Colin Andrews, another famous crop circle researcher, and you got Ray there, and then Reg. So why has the first autopsy never been shown? Because it was another 15 minutes of film, and it was actually more clearer and more graphic. It was shown to Maurizio Baiato and Reg Presley on April 26th by Chris Carey, one of Ray's associates, and I believe later to Colin Andrews. Philip Mantle and his wife were also shown it in Santilli's office on April 28th. Similar length to the second autopsy, but with no severed hand or leg damage. Santilli thought, due to its graphic nature, it wouldn't be shown on TV. It was said to be owned by Volker Spielberg, who had never released it. So yeah, it was strange that Ray said it was too, actually more graphic, so that's interesting. And there was some stills released of this. You can see, again, these very bulky, unusual legs. If you're going to create an alien type thing, why would you give these, so these are some very rare stills. This footage has now disappeared off the face of the earth, and there's various claims why this has never been shown. I just think it was confiscated, basically. And brain, and there's more graphic image there. So what did the cameraman say of the third autopsy? He said, this is a conversation with Ray, he said, in May 1949 I was asked to film the third autopsy, and Ray said, the third autopsy? Yes, the freak lived for 2 more years. The autopsy was performed at Washington in a big auditorium in the presence of scientists from various states, also from England and France. Ray, where had they kept the creature in prison for 2 years? I don't know, but I heard that they had been able to communicate with him, but without words, non-verbal, whatever that means. So it's interesting how this would have been shown in Washington, and again, people from England and France. It's another claim, but so there was other things like there was canned labels with photocopies of. I don't think the originals were ever released, but Ray did give people these photocopies of allegedly what was on the the reels of film, and as you can see there on the right hand side, the it says June 1947 recovery, undeveloped, and bits there. There's a bit, I think on this one, is it about Truman? It actually mentions Truman. It might be the next slide actually. Actually, let me just go back one. I think it doesn't mention Truman. I think it's on that left one there, or the right one. But anyway, I mean, it was another aspect of the story, which, and it had that seal, that CIA type what, because this claim was that in 1947 there was lots of things how this managed to escape detection was that. You know, obviously the cameraman being able to keep footage such as this was, you know, mind-boggling really, that something so secret. But there were big changes happening, and the Army and the Air Force went their separate ways basically, and the CIA was formed. I don't doubt though that this was the first, you know, there was other crash retrievals, but I just think 47, I think maybe there was an increase of crashes and stuff, and it could have been possible that through the bureaucracy and the secrecy of it. I mean, the cameraman was told not to mention it, and this someone might have brought it up first, you know. So he was sort of sworn to secrecy, and I think it's plausible. But it may be more to it. There may be some data. I always say there may be some data missing that we don't know about. That, you know, there's an important little piece of the jigsaw missing. So was the film ever authenticated? Yes. Well, Bob Shell said, I have now physically examined a section of the film, a section shown in the autopsy room before the body was placed on the table, but clearly consistent with the later footage. The film on which this was shot is signed Kodak Super XX, a film type which was discontinued in 56, 57. Since the edge code would be either 27, 47 or 67, and this film was not manufactured in 27 or 67, this clearly leaves us with only 47 as an option. There's some debate, however, that the footage is actually connected to the so-called autopsy, because basically this was a leader footage into the room, and it's actually on the original VHS video I showed you earlier, the £33 one. It's strangely not part of the actual one that was released, and that was claimed that was the piece of footage that they used, and obviously there was an outcry saying, well, why can't we see date the piece of footage with the alien on it, because that would then prove it. So there was a big uproar about this. And obviously it didn't make Ray made him look a bit dishonest, because they're thinking, well, why are you suddenly hiding it? But I think there was a reason for that. So likewise, claims of who transferred the images from the original 60mm film remain shrouded in secrecy or in mystery, and we don't know. There is some names that have been mentioned, which we'll go into. For many, the lack of authentication of parts of the film actually showing the creature was a sign it was all a hoax. But could the reels have been confiscated after the transfer? And this is kind of my belief, and why I talk about the alien autopsy conspiracy and what happened afterwards. So that time period, it was a big thing in the UK, at least. I don't know what was happening around the world, but I mean, it was getting all that attention. But you had magazines such as Encounters. This is like the first issue. You can see there, October '95, talking about the Greys and the image of the Roswell. And the good thing about these images was obviously the claim that if it was military film, they could never be sued, because if it was genuine film, then so the military are going to come knocking on the door, say, well, you can't, because that would like shoot themselves in the foot by admitting that, that's their footage when they're giving authentic. So that's why I think it was really nothing happened for years, 10, 11 years it was, until someone came out with claiming that it was a hoax or a recreation, which we'll go into. And there's UFO magazine, that's from 2002. So it was still going on the right hand side there with the Philip Mantle, some very interesting little bits in that one. So things were still happening, it was still being discussed. I mean, if it was a hoax, for me, it would have been exposed a long, long time ago. And this is why I think there was, a reality to it. One of them in that magazine was Frank Salas, who Philip Mantle did get a transcript, a telephone conversation with, and he said some people were arguing that the AA was filmed from video, not transferred from 60mm as claimed by Santilli. Experts, however, outside of Santilli's company, claims this is true, came forward to Philip Mantle in 2001. This is, years before the idea that it was all a hoax. Frank Salas was a technician who transferred the original 60mm onto video in London. He said that some of the film was of pretty poor quality, but other parts were not too bad at all. He gave Philip detailed information of how he transferred the 60mm film into both VHS and Betacam, as well as the type of equipment used. He was in no doubt that it was indeed 60mm film of the alien autopsy, but was not prepared to guess at its age, as this was not his area of expertise. So there's lots of, you know, people involved in this story. We go back to Reg Presley now, who reveals something interesting in his book that he brought out, and I believe an attempt to suppress the footage in his 2004 book, and it was called Wild Things They Don't Tell Us, which is covering all his belief in, you know, investigation into crop circles. But because he was quite close, as I say, he was he got very friendly with Ray. He actually got information that I had never seen before, and it was a real eye-opener to hear this little nugget of a story. So was Ray visited by the Men in Black, or at least sort of a military group? Now Reg had warned Ray to make more than one copy of the footage in case he was burgled. I mean, I don't think Ray was that naive. He probably knew what he was sitting on. I think he was actually, he had gone to extreme lengths to get you know, to hide it and to do all sorts and make copies. And maybe, I think in some ways he showed it to so many people that in some ways I think it may have saved his life even. So Ray at first laughed it off, but then one day he claimed he had a call from someone claiming to work for T42 or T42, and organisation made up of, so he said, of the American and English Secret Services. You might think that's a bit brazen for someone to come out and say that, but sometimes a lot of these people are very brazen and will say, you know, come straight out of it. Ray's office and film studio were both burgled. Someone was trying to get hold of the master copy, but as luck would have it, missed each time. After these burglaries, Ray was pestered again by T42, who were contacting him every day, and he finally relented. A man showed up and watched the film intensely and said that would it be okay if he came back later with his superior. I'm not sure what time period this is. I'm guessing must be not long after he transferred it. So I'm thinking about a window of about April, May, June, July. April, May, June, I reckon. Possibly April, May. Strangely, on their return, they now took it less seriously and began to run it down. So his superior had sort of come across it, and then he was saying, now, oh, of course you do realise we have received dozens of these kinds of films this year alone, and if you tried to pass this off as real, you'd probably get sued, which is just a ridiculous thing to say, because there was no alien autopsy footage that I've ever seen ever been talked about before. So I think this is a genuine story, and it's quite a real eye-opener about something that had gone on behind the scenes. Now, Reg thoughts in his book says, and I think I agree with, he says, I believe Ray had personally seen all the footage at that time, and they even shown all of it to the T42 guys, because soon after that meeting, when the President Truman footage came to be taken out of the canister, it had become stuck, supposedly, and impossible to play. Ray spoke about the Truman footage in too much detail for me to believe he hadn't seen it. I believe he was threatened with his life that day and took the Truman film out of play himself. Now, I go along with the idea that this kind of makes sense that the whole thing was confiscated and he was threatened, but obviously the cat was out the bag, the horse had bolted, and he'd shown it to a lot of people, he'd transferred it to video, and that was something that not even they could put back in the bottle, so it was a case of damage limitation. And it would also explain why he was never able to date, you know, to give people the satisfactory answers, and always come across as a bit dodgy. You may think, oh, it was just a shyster, and he was just, you know, taking the mick out of people, taking them all their money, and he was just greedy. But there's no evidence that Ray was a liar. There's nothing in his history that he was involved in deception before this. You know, he was, like I say, he was a music producer, and looking for old bits of film and that. I just think he got in. It was just a case that he just literally won the lottery on this piece of footage. That's my opinion, and I believe that that footage was taken. Of course, he could never say that that footage was confiscated or it was threatened. It was intriguing, though, that maybe it's a shame that Reg sadly no longer with us, because I would like to ask him about this story and when he was told this by Ray. Because when I contacted Ray, he didn't want to talk about this. That's a fact. I'm having a lot of trouble with all the people I've contacted in regard to this story. It's strangely, no, I'm being not met with any sort of response or any interaction, so that should tell you something as well, and we'll talk about that later. So again, we'll go back to the crash site, and there was a crash site. So what made it even more interesting then was the claims that the cameraman gave details of an actual crash site in Socorro where it happened. So, how's that happen, and if it's all a hoax? So Michael Hessman, who's a famous, at the time, a UFO researcher, and he was responsible for that Beyond Roswell book. He's also a German historian. He went looking for the crash site with the team in June 95. It was claimed the UFO crashed in May 31st, 47 in the area between Socorro and Magdalena. Now, documents were found that spoke of the reopening of a mine in the area on the 1st of June, but there was no mining took place, and indeed 2 weeks later it was terminated and sold in 1953. So that's kind of interesting, like a sort of front for sort of work going on out there. Now, witnesses claim to have seen a meteorite around this time period. Local papers are strangely missing from the 10th of May to the 15th of June. Papers archives were also missing from Magdalena and the Library of New Mexico, and you see this again many times where things go strangely missing in public records to give actual proof, and that for me is actual evidence of a cover-up, clearly. Three Laguna Indians, aged around 13 or 14 and 47, came forward. They were among a dozen children who had seen the night sky light up as if daytime in less than 4 seconds. A big ball of fire had glided over their heads. 2 days later, all the children had blisters, but doctors could not determine the cause. And a little side note, according to the witnesses, a strange girl appeared on the scene. Her skin was greyish and she had grey hair which looked as if she was wearing a wig. She avoided all contact with grown-ups but sought the children who had seen the ball of fire. Most of them kept away from her. She was so odd, but some played with her. Those that did became ill. The closer the contact, the worse the sickness. After about a week, the mysterious girl vanished and was never seen again. The girl had kept a diary at the time, and it was May 31st, 1947. Her daughter had heard Bob Shell talking on the Art Bell show and contacted him. He got in touch with the other witnesses. One of them spoke of being 7 at the time and how she was playing outside. She was so frightened she swallowed a quarter which she had in her mouth. However, she was one of the few not to have burns. She said the strange girl wore white clothes and the men tried to catch her, but she disappeared. She was small like a child and wore a white veil that hid her face, so they did not know if she was white or Indian. There was something eerie about her. She always went along the river from the east. And this is an account from the Beyond Roswell book. You get this high stranger sort of surrounding these sort of things, the phenomenon. I think that was very, worth mentioning. So a possible crash site was found. Bob Shell, who's one of the principal investigators, was part of a team in '96. He was a photographic expert, and we'll get onto that. He was unconvinced by Michael's Hessman's claims of a crash site, saying it was too close to the town of Socorro and there were no dry lake beds, as has been described. He got more details of the crash site with the cameraman on the other line, giving more accurate directions, but could not locate the site. However, in 2002, researcher Ed Gurman, whose daughter you actually saw interview, or you didn't see her, but she was interviewing Roger Lear earlier, said he believed he had found the site of a few miles from the Hessman's original. The site was 45 minutes from the road. Burnt vegetation and a strange blue material covering the rocks was found. The cameraman stated the site would be on the northeast bank of a dry lake bed and at the end of a canyon, and this would seem to match. Trees also appeared to be burnt 100 feet from the cliff. All of the heat seemed to come from above rather than a brush fire underneath. 2 cliff faces were covered with peculiar glass-like material. Lab results showed this was cristobalite. This substance occurs in igneous rocks located in areas of volcanic activity and should not be found here. It only forms at extremely high temperatures. Ed is in no doubt that this is the site described by the cameraman and since has visited it on many further occasions with further trips planned. And I'm in contact with Ed and I find that story very intriguing, and I'd like to definitely go out and see that one day. Another guy, a person mentioned in the book Beyond Roswell, this gentleman called Robert Morningsky. He was half Hopi Apache and he spoke with Indians on the reservation. They told him from which direction the disc came and where it crashed. There are rumours about a number of beings and a number of crashes. Often the beings would survive the crash but not the retrieval routine, which is deeply sad. They were beings from the stars, closer to God than anyone else, and these soldiers shot or killed them with blows. The Indians were scared to talk and feared the same of them if they did. Robert claimed there were 16 crashes, let that sink in, between 1945 and 1960 in the USA, and that 14 had occurred on or near Indian reservations. He said Indians prefer to sleep under the open sky, hence it's strange that UFO researchers never asked them about such things. That's a good point. He also claimed the Star Elder looked like the one described by his grandfather. A month after Roswell, his grandfather and 5 friends had rescued one from a crash and nursed it back to health. it spoke of a war amongst the stars, and you can read about that in the Terror Papers. He said that man is not a natural creation, but was developed specially to serve the star beings. And you may have heard various things like the creation stories of, the Anunnaki and all things like that. And there's a picture of the an Anastasia petroglyph in Utah, and you can see there's reference to these six-fingered, six-toed beings. You can see the six-toe being footprints, or rather cave drawing type petroglyphs. And so that's very unusual. And that wheel you can see again, that people have took that as being reference to UFOs, and so there's clearly claims of these beings going back from way back, basically, and the stories of six-fingered, six-toed beings of, it's come up like the Titans, and there's various other claims that these such as the metric scale, and where we get the six comes from. So there's a whole bit more to this, I think, that does give it some credibility. These six-fingered beings. So we have, of course, the Trinity that's a rare photo of the Trinity explosion, which was it was a code name of the first detonation of a nuclear weapon conducted in the United States on July 16th, 1949, as part of the Manhattan Project. The test was conducted in a desert of about 35 miles southeast of Socorro, New Mexico. Could this be a coincidence? The cameraman himself had claimed to have filmed it from the air. Had the nuclear explosion opened a window into our world, or at least drawn the attention of ETs from somewhere else? And I sort of go along with the idea that, we had the bomb group at Roswell and everything to do with the atomic bomb. So it kind of makes sense that these ETs would have had an interest, or at least, and possibly this atomic explosion did literally rip at some sort of tear in, space, time, brought some beings in. Of course, this wasn't the only UFO crash, and as I said, that it's not all about Roswell. There are many accounts of various UFO crash retrievals. I recommend reading all the books of Leonard Stringfield, who was a prolific writer. He didn't name his sources, but there was a whole plethora of information in his books on all sorts of crash retrievals going on and autopsies. So this is certainly nothing new, and we know about this one again, another intriguing story that predates claims of a crash at Roswell, and of course this one I talked to in this talk, and that was a book by Paul Blake Smith, and he refers to this crash, and it's called The Bombshell Before Roswell. So the idea that there was actually many crashes going on, and we can all get a bit tired of Roswell, but that was one of the ones that they didn't very good at covering up, but they were a lot more successful with other ones. Although this is an intriguing case, and I recommend reading it. It's about this Baptist Reverend William Hoffman, who was a minister. He was in the ministry in Cape Girardeau, and very interesting account. And again, you might find, people say, "Oh, where's the evidence for UFOs? It all seems to go missing." And for me, the alien autopsy is like the best for me evidence what we've actually had. But again, there was a photo in this case of the Cape Girardeau, again of a sort of grey type being, and this is a reconstruction by this family of the preacher, who he actually was able to keep this photo for a number of years until it was confiscated by a friend of the family. And you may have seen these hoax photos of two soldiers holding up a being, but these are like civilian people. The actual photo, this is actually a reconstruction of what this photo actually showed, and it did actually show a being from this 1941 crash. And obviously it's very frustrating when evidence like this sort of disappears. You can be cynical about it, but I think there's a lot to it, and it's an intriguing account, and I wanted to bring that to people's attention. And of course the Aztec crash and the whole matter of other crashes that now have greater credibility. They think they did a good job on the Aztec crash, a bit like they tried to do on the alien autopsy, in my opinion. So the cameraman, he was actually interviewed. So the big thing was everyone wanted to know who the cameraman was, and it was a controversial thing that, why can't we speak to him? And everyone wanted to talk, and he was getting a bit browned off because he didn't want to talk to anyone, and his main thing was anonymity. But if you believe what happened at the end of '96, there was a recording done, I think, earlier on that year, around the summertime with Fuji TV, in Japan, and they broadcast a 6-minute interview edited from 12 minutes of a cameraman supposedly filmed by his son back in July. Now, Robert Kiviat, who did that, Fact or Fiction, he provided Ray with 27 questions to ask the cameraman. He came across as very nervous, as he could be seen shaking. He insisted in filming himself in silhouette, but it went horribly wrong. In somewhat a glaring error, the identity of the cameraman could be seen by increasing the brightness. So this was filmed by his son, allegedly, and it does seem rather strange that if it was all a hoax, that he would be so inept to pull off something like the alien autopsy, but then this cameraman, and you can watch it now on YouTube, the actual, it's taken me a while to actually see it. The first time I actually saw it was actually this year, finally sort of resurfaced again. It's not the best quality, and it was never shown on the American networks, but that was what he put some glasses, but that's quite a clear image, I would say. There's been all sorts of claims about this cameraman, and someone saying, oh, it was all hoaxed and we got someone off the streets of Los Angeles and dressed him up and all this stuff, which we'll be going into later. But I don't know. I think there is a validity to this, and something to it. So that's basically the alien autopsy as we know it, and then of course that went on for a number of years, nothing really getting the wiser. It was all debated and nothing really new was forthcoming. So it's incredible that something could last that long and be shown. It's been claimed 1 billion people have seen that footage. And you thought, well, if they wanted to cover it up, why did they take so long? I mean, I think there's a very good reason for that. I think they were waiting for all the research to be done and for all the, the experts to have get their story out, and then they could sort of bring out some sort of counterclaim. And this is certainly what I believe happened with this piece of disinformation that happened in 2006, and it was called AIM. Maybe that's a Freudian slip. AIM and Investigate, not Alien Investigates, but Alien Autopsy, the true story. And that was Eamon Holmes, who was kind of like a famous presenter on daytime TV, various TV. And he didn't investigate much else. This was like his only documentary, and it's very suspicious the timing that this both came out, which is just past April Fool's Day, obviously, 2006. So this was 11 years after the autopsy footage had come out, basically. And it was now being, it was like, it was two pieces of deception here. There was a documentary and there was a motion picture film that came out regarding the alien autopsy. So the story had now changed, and we can see there Ray Santilli in the back of a taxi with Gary Shoefield on his left there. And so now they were now claiming that 95% of the footage was a recreation with some real clips mixed in when the original film eroded. It sounded more unbelievable than the original story. The idea that there was actually some a percentage, there was 5% actual real footage and the rest was a recreation, because he claimed that it had degraded when they opened up these film canisters. So they thought, well, we can't let this opportunity go. We're going to recreate it and still make money. I mean, this is for me total disinformation, and it was laughable. But I think there was a couple of reasons why that was. I mean, clearly no one believed this. I'm not aware of many people who seriously study the subject and actually believe that it was a restoration and it was like 5% real footage. I think the thing was that Ray, was threatened, but they give him a get-out clause, and that was that he could say that, instead of getting sued over this film footage, that he could actually say, well, part of it was actually genuine footage, because that he made, make no mistake about it. There's been claims he made like £17 million. We're dealing with the greatest hoax of all time, supposedly. And so it was now a recreation, and this guy apparently called John Humphreys, he made the aliens, if you believe that, which I never believed. Now, John was a famous. Well, he's not that famous. That's the thing. Again, he worked on the odd Doctor Who. He did bits of Max Headroom, but nothing of any. He wasn't working for Hollywood by any means. And this is a curious photo which comes up as the only evidence that he actually made that alien autopsy. And as my colleague Neil Morris says, that that mould is not consistent with what the alien was on the original Alien Autopsy. Looks more like the prop for the Ant and Dec film, which we're going to go into. But he claimed that he used sheep brains, chicken entrails, a sheep's knuckle joint from a film from a friend at Smithfield Market. I mean, just because he's got a beard there, it's like, they're claiming this is from '95. That's just like nonsense for me. I mean, when you look up some of his claims, it's just bizarre. This was a guy in the documentary who worked at Smithfield Market and saying, backs him up, saying, yeah, I know John, and he wanted off Thorn Bones to make an alien. It's kind of dubious. I don't really trust this person, and it's very suspicious. I'm not buying that story. And there was a still, I mean, this is so, literally a blink or you miss it, where they show the back of their car there, and implying obviously that this footage, this debris, was the one that we saw earlier from the 2-minute film clip of the debris footage. And like, you got a couple of film reels in there. It's all Mickey Mouse sort of stuff, like being portrayed as wide boy shysters. If you've seen any Fools and Horses, that they're out to make money, and that mould. I mean, that's clearly not the original. I mean, that's just an appalling version. I mean, you could say it was a mould of the original, but even the mould looks absolute just rubbish. And maybe that's why they only showed it for a second. It seems such a disinformation piece. It's totally laughable. So one of my big criticisms of why it's not a hoax, and is actually this person here, which is Gareth Watson, and he is the man apparently, if you believe the cover up, in the viewing window. And as I say, he's Gareth Watson, and you can see a couple of minutes of clip of him on this documentary. So that was from 2006. So he's claiming that was him from the original footage. So you'd have to take 11 years off him from that image from 2006, because obviously they claim that it was filmed in a flat in Camden, which is the cover story, in 1995, in April 1995. So I actually think this guy is probably late 30s from the actual original footage, and I'm thinking that guy, Gareth Watson on the right, is actually not too far away from that in 2006, and then you've got to take 11 years off it. I mean, the only thing that I would say that he's got some bushy eyebrows there, but I've actually looked into this guy, and I sent in an email, which I'll just talk about to see what the next slide is. But that's, some people claim that's Detlev Bronk, the actual person on the original footage. He was supposed to be one of the Majestic 12. They've just mocked up that picture with a mask to see what Gareth, as a comparison. I think he's got a fatter face, and one of the Italian researchers had done this. They reversed the image so they could actually look at him from that angle. And for me, it's one of the big things that I just think you could show that and have major questions before you have some person who claims they hoaxed it do a 3-hour talk in Leicester Square saying that a spiel and story after tall story. I mean, for me, he didn't even reference this, and I've had, and I'll be talking about this gentleman, this magician guy who claims he hoaxed it a bit later. But anyway, so that's an interesting image, because I think even if you take then 11 years off that gentleman, Gareth on the right, and compare it, I mean, his ears would have had to have shrunk quite, at the time. His ears are grown rather, and you can look at the bridge of the nose, you can even look at his shoulders, and once you reach, your face isn't going to change that much. The shape of his face, I just think this is a massive, tall story, and they pulled the wool over people's eyes, and for me, it's really embarrassing. Even skeptics, when we were debating this on the Facebook page, were saying, well, even I can say that that's not the same person, even if it's, how young would Gareth be then? I'm saying he would be in like his 20s. So this is clearly, for me, not the same person. And that, for me, you can put an end to the whole hoax idea straight with that. That's the end of it. So why bother why put the poor magician out of his misery and do a 3-hour presentation? So the guy, some people have said, not necessarily I believe myself, but was Detlev Bronk possibly, or at least one of the surgeons, not necessarily the one in the viewing window, but maybe one of the actual people doing the surgery. And Bob Shell again, he was one of the photographic experts. He said the cameraman says that the two surgeons in the room are a Dr. Detlev Bronk and a Dr. Williams. So he was actually, I guess he is implying there that they are the surgeons rather maybe than the person in the window. Now, forensic pathologists who have watched the film have said that what it looks to them like the man doing the work is not a pathologist but a surgeon, based on the way he cuts and the way he holds the instruments and the way he manipulates. Apparently there's a difference in the way surgeons and pathologists handle their implements, which supports the cameraman's claim that he was a surgeon. We do know that Dr. Detlev Bronk was a real person. At the time of the autopsy, he was Chief of Air Medicine in the United States Army Air Force, which would mean he would have been called in at any unusual air crash or event like that. From 1952 onwards, he was president of the Rockefeller Institute of Medicine, and they have his personal papers. When I went to the Rockefeller Institute, this is Bob Shell, several weeks ago to inquire about this, they said they had all of Dr. Bronk's personal papers, including his personal diaries, his date books, his correspondence. When I said that I wanted to see this material for 1947, I was told that all of Dr. Bronk's personal diaries are missing and unaccounted for. So what a big surprise that was. Lots of these papers go missing mysteriously, so this is given extra credibility that, you know, there's stuff they're hiding from you here. So the other part, after that documentary, then a couple of days later, it was like a 1-2 disinformation hit piece, psyop, if you will, and they made a film which obviously they've been working on, because there was no sort of hint that this was all going to come out as a hoax, but obviously we knew that there was a film coming up called Alien Autopsy, and it was like a big reveal that it was going to be a recreate, you know, they were going to spin it, you know, a lie in Autopsy. You can see that there. And they got these sort of celebrities from England who are quite well known, who were quite popular still, and that was Ant and Dec, and you can see them there. Sort of humorous picture. So there was an attempt, I believe, to give disinfo out, and this was what it was, and obviously a lot of money. If you don't doubt how much money can be spent on disinformation, there's a still from it. And it's now the intriguing thing is, their claim is that John Humphreys helped make the aliens. He obviously says his story is that he made the original one, so he was then brought in to make the recreation for the film. Obviously, it doesn't compare with the original. It's not, you know, it's not too shoddy, I'd say, but it's nowhere near what we see in the actual Alien Autopsy footage. And there's like even things where they recreate it. Why would they get things wrong, like having a completely wrong danger sign? If he was there in the room, wouldn't he say, well, he didn't say that or whatever, you know? And so why was it a cartoony recreation? I mean, it's like I say, it's not a bad version, but I don't think it matches up with what we've seen before. And even the suits here, you can see they're not the same. They're not all in one suit. So there's obviously the amount of money that had been put in would have had to be put in to make the original 95 footage was just too hard, I believe. Wouldn't be done. And here we have old John. I feel sorry for him, but he's obviously been got at in some, or he's doing it for money. I don't know what his reasons are. He might be threatened. His family might be threatened, as normally happens, and they would have done to Santilli. But you have to show both aliens, even though we haven't seen the first autopsy. So there you go. Obviously, that's proof that he did the original 95 one, and he's looking very guilty there, isn't he? So no, I'm not buying it, John. And all my correspondence, he doesn't want to talk. Why do these people not want to talk? They've done the greatest hoax of all time. Apparently, they don't want to talk about it. And there's the premiere, and we can see. I mean, one of the things we see is Ray and Gary all very cheesy grins, as we saw on the documentary. It's all the sort of Del Boy, and the shysters basically, and. Of course, he had a son at the time, and it's interesting to know that they both had sons called Luke, and that's Ray's son there, Luke Santilli, who would have been about 7 years old at the time. So people say, well, I wouldn't, if someone's threatening my children and things like that, it's quite persuasive. You're going to be quite persuaded by all that. So who is this guy? I mentioned Bob Shell a couple of times, and he was one of the most prominent investigators. He was a photographic expert, and this is an intriguing story. Why, again, I believe this is another aspect of the massive conspiracy. He's now serving 32 years in prison for manslaughter. So there's a photo of him, Stanton Friedman, the famous Roswell UFO researcher, and there's Philip Mantle on his left, sitting on his left there. That's at a conference in the Republic of San Marino, where they were dealing with the alien autopsy saga. So Bob Shell, he was born in 1946, he trained in zoology and he studied fine art. He later worked for Shutterbug magazine for 30 years. He wrote some 24 books on cameras and photography. He acted as a photographic technical consultant for the FBI, CIA, intelligence agencies and for private industry. So we know he had connections there. So he offered to help Ray because he was not going to the right people at Kodak. This is when he was trying to age the film. Now, at the time, this was later on, this is 2003, I believe it is, yeah. His 19-year-old model girlfriend died of a morphine overdose on June the 3rd, 2003, during a bondage-themed photographic session. She was a self-confessed drug addict. The trial was delayed for 4 years, plagued by allegations of police and prosecution misconduct, which we've heard before. Bob wasn't there when her body was found. The claims included he had sex with her dead body, all these lurid stories. Shell was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and 7 other drug and sex offences. At the age of 60, Shell was sentenced to 32.5 years imprisonment. All his appeals have since failed. And, we talk about people who are in prison, and I think there's Captain Mark Richards that Kerry Cassidy talks about, and people getting framed for child porn, other, such as the Romanet case, and back here in England, people involved in the subject, they seem to, people want to silence them. They've either trod on people's toes, and they get taken out in various ways. And I believe this was what happened because Bob Shell did give a lot of credibility to the alien autopsy subject, and he was an expert on it. And it's sadly not even mentioned in some of the books, like Philip Mantle's, that this is what happened to him. And it's important to recognise Bob Shell and his work he did on the alien autopsy and the credibility he gave it. So was he targeted then for giving it too much credibility? He claimed that an engineer from the US Air Force had told him that he had worked on the alien boxes in '68. He said, we found out how they record information, but not how it can be read back. So that's interesting. In April '96, Bob Shell was contacted by the US Air Force following an inquiry from President Clinton's scientific advisor, Dr. John Gibbons. The United States Air Force captain told Shell that they had located footage from the same stock in their archives and verified that at least part of the Santilli material is genuine and shows no dummy and no human. They knew the cameraman's name, Jack X, because there was claims it was called Jack Barnett and all various stuff, but asked Shell to forward an address. Since the military records building in St. Louis had had a fire and many records had been lost, a search would be time-consuming and expensive. So that's quite sinister for me, I think. He's still locked up. But other witnesses have come forward saying that they had seen similar footage, if you believe that this footage is genuine, when obviously they wouldn't have copies of it, unless you believe obviously that Cameron had somehow managed to copy that footage, and that's why he kept it. But one of these people was First Lieutenant Cooper, and he viewed it in 1957 with his superior. It was sent from Fort Belvoir. You can read about this with Linda Moulton Howe on her Files website. Very interesting 13-part interview with him, giving credibility to the whole Santilli footage, and that he'd seen that a while back. Then you got Clifford Stone, who was quite famous, a controversial character involved in crash retrievals, and he was transporting a senior officer to, again, Fort Belvoir in Virginia in '69. He snuck off with another officer, and they viewed officers being shown UFO films and alien autopsies in a theatre through a window in an auditorium. And then you got Sergeant Master Bob Allen, who was shown film for 2.5 hours at a top secret site near Tonopah, Nevada in 1986. He says, I saw 3 autopsies. During one, President Truman stood behind the glass in the screen in the autopsy room. He wore a surgeon's face mask. After a few days, the first one died, then the second. They were determined to keep the fourth one alive. It lived another 2 years. So that's interesting. That exactly matches what the cameraman's statement was, and the idea that President Truman was there. Then you had Japanese researcher Jason Takano and Dr. Huang Yang of the National Research Center of Biotechnology in Taipei. They claimed that Babe Beef had seen it before after viewing the footage at Ray Santilli's office with Colin Andrews. Joseon when his government requested UFO information from the US government sent by a CIA courier to Tokyo, and Hwang when he visited the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Also of interest is Mike Maloney, OBE, Britain's most decorated press photographer, claims through a meeting with some of the original Walt Disney animators in 1978 he was invited to view some flying saucer films. He was shown similar footage to the alien autopsy. So this is very interesting, and then you can hear about Mike Maloney's account. I'm just going to play that for you now. There's long been talk of connections with Disney and this subject, and what do they actually know? Kind of like 10 years later now, so apparently it's going to be next year now, sometime April, May, or whatever. And again, we see his talent for art here. Supposedly some drawings before they made the alien, and see the 6 fingers. I just think this is nonsense, really. Everything means something. It's very easy to say these things after it's all come out and claim that you did it, but I don't believe a word of it. So who is this guy? So he came forward in 2007 with claims he ran the team behind the alien autopsy and debris footage. He was kicked out of the Magic Circle 2005. One member was quoted as saying he has produced the worst kind of behaviour the society has seen in its history. It was later reinstated. Now, claims were made that he was made bankrupt in '94, in fact twice actually, 1990 and '94, and spent time for evading HMRC payments. His friend and solicitor Andrew Crossley was the founder of ACS Law, who was found guilty of blackmailing people for file sharing in 2012 and suspended for 2 years and made to pay $76,000. He was declared bankrupt himself in 2011. So he's obviously, he needs to choose his company a bit better, because that's not giving him any credibility in my eyes as someone's pulling off the greatest hoax of all time. And the gentleman, the magician as I'll call him, threatened to sue me over posting links to these claims and on my Alien Autopsy Facebook page. He then set up his own group in anger after I kicked him off my page for swearing and abusive comments to Clifford Stone. His group is a secret group and has just 33 members, and he rarely posts any updates, whereas mine is, over 1,000 members now. And how can he be the one who actually made it? And it seems that I'm more passionate about him than him. He posts for friends in high places, and he says his book will finally be out in September. This is obviously an old slide, but as you can see, it just goes on and on. He did recently appear in a Sky UK Gold documentary called The World's Greatest Hoaxes. So some of his claims are that he designed and directed the film, he made the autopsy table and the biohazard suits, which is most impressive. And he did actually give a talk recently in Leicester Square, which you may have seen, and it generated a lot of publicity in the media. And he did the talk for about 3 hours, and it wasn't. I'm not buying any of it, but let me. He claims the main researcher was his girlfriend, who he claims worked for the government, and conveniently he refuses to talk. So she's sort of become like the cameraman who didn't want to talk. Now she's we can't talk to her, so she's like a very convenient sort of plot device for him, where he can refuses. She won't talk. She spoke to the surgeons and pathologists and even played the role of the nurse, because you can see that actually one of the nurses does have breasts from the actual, clearly see that on that footage. She got her mum to write in a 1940s style for the labels and doctor's notes. John Humphreys made both the aliens. His friend Greg Simmons was a soldier holding the debris, which we'll go into in a little bit, because that's the guy who's holding up the debris footage. The set was his girlfriend's house. He acquired the props of which none remain. The first autopsy footage ditched was due to an incorrect medical procedure, which is just one of the most funniest things about it. But they claim that because they got they had a pathologist doing the medical procedures. That's the whole reason why the first autopsies was taken out of the game and then never seen again. It's like totally disappeared. But then you could argue, well, if that proves that it's all a hoax, why can't we see the first autopsy footage? And you know, who's got it now? He claims, I think, that Ray's got it, or Volker Spielberg, which just doesn't sound plausible to me. And then he says so after the first one they had to throw away because of that, he then says that they were paid for making he himself paid for the making of a second model. However, an air bowl appeared and John was dispatched to get a sheep's leg joint, so that's why you can see, and they had to weave this story about you know, around the cameraman's story, which is kind of interesting because I don't think he actually takes credit for the cameraman's story, and he thinks, oh, Ray's got that information from somewhere. And it's the same with the cameraman's interview. Those questions are answered. That's something that he claims that he didn't make up himself. So that's very intriguing if you think about it. So both bodies were said to have been cut up and put in bins around London, which again just sounds you know, very convenient that all the evidence has gone missing and you can't even see these in like the props and everything. It would give a lot of credibility if it had anything such as you know, cutting room floor footage, and you know, where's all the other little films, all the unedited stuff? It just doesn't seem plausible that they could have just lost all that, or it was all handed back to Ray. I'm just thinking this is just a baloney, basically. He says that the debris footage was designed by him and based on Greek letters and artistic license. And you know, some of the writing, you know, it says it's Elefthera and it means freedom. That one of those beams that we saw, and one of them says the words Isis on it, which are obviously referring to the goddess, not the terror cell, which I find plausible. I don't have an issue with that. The writing does mean that, and this gentleman then did actually make his own documentary, which is worth seeing, which was well the investigation continues, which Santilli financed, like a follow-up to the original Roswell, and it's actually a very good pro-alien autopsy documentary. And you would say, well, he would say that if he actually hoaxed it, but he he interviews these archaeologists and talks about the writing. It's kind of weird that he now says that, you know, that's he's the one who came up with all this writing, and that he's responsible for putting those words onto it all. You know, it's a very tall story. He flew to LA to meet Shoefield, where they found an 80-year-old tramp to play the cameraman, as per Eamon Investigates. So cleaned him up, gave him a shave, a false prosthetic nose, and got him to read from a script. And he also said, at the recent Leicester Square talk, that he actually gave him a false chin and cheeks as well. So it's just like, just bizarre. And it's just, I don't buy it. And he claims now that this guy is called Moose Carlson, and he was he was a bit part actor in some of these sort of sex comedies in the late 70s. On the basis of it sounds a bit like him, and he slowed him down. But I think what it is let's go back one. I think he's just if you see his talk, and I think he's giving a talk in Sheffield next year when his book supposedly is coming out with Philip Mantle. He has these little anecdotal stories, like how the room in Camden was broken into by someone, and obviously they left the model of the alien upstairs, and they would have got a real fright. And he works all these little anecdotal stories to give credibility and make people laugh, but it's actually nothing really. It's all just trying to add little bits to give it more credibility, little backstories. Think, well, why would he make it up? Why would he put all these little backstories in, as if like, he can't be making this up. He's just so convincing. But if you look at his body language, it's actually very revealing. And there's been claims that, you know, they're going to do a lie detector tests, and from the Daily Express article recently that even Santilli was smoked out after the Leicester Square thing, and he's up for this lie detector thing. But it's very suspicious, and I should say that I believe that the there's supposed to be this feud between the magician and Santilli. But I think this is just another part of the deception, because for me, I don't trust. I think, you know, Santilli's been got. I think the only time he was telling the truth was at the beginning, and, you know, to give the story more credibility, he came across as, you know, the 2006 story as being a recreation, and he's having this feud with the magician about it being a real hoax and that. And I think maybe they'll crucify him on TV. They'll say, they'll put a lie detector up and they'll say, oh, we found out he's lying, and because they'll just show they just show you the angle that they want. But for me, they're both. I mean, I have messaged Ray, and some of his answers I just find very, very strange as well. So I think they're playing a game where if he came out and said it was all a hoax, I think a lot of people would have been suspicious. But because he's still holding on to the idea that some of it's true, they feel like they give some credibility. So this guy's interesting. This guy called Julian Bray, who wrote a letter on behalf of the magician in 2008, and because basically after the Anna Deck stuff, this guy Julian Bray was writing letters to people, sort of threatening them off the alien autopsy, saying, "Oh, this is my client, and this is my, you know, he's doing this. He was involved. He made it." And you can read that. It says, by way of introduction, I act for the magician who originally designed and created the alien model and devised the subsequent alien autopsy. This included all elements. Mr. Molaris physically filmed the original so-called vintage footage in London and filmed additional interviews in the USA. The alien autopsy vests with Mr. Molaris intellectual property and moral rights. Mr. Molaris is therefore formally asserting all his rights. If you do not have a formal written agreement with him, kindly remember all copyright breaches and remove all references to the copyright properties known as the alien autopsy from your website, publications, retail and online sales channels. Mr. Santilli, according to my client, is not authorised to assign, set, sell, let or otherwise dispose or negotiate on any intellectual property, artistic or creative work which are lawfully the property and copyright. Kindly confirm that you have read and understand this full notice. So that's quite, you know, he's sort of sending this sort of threatening letters. So who was this guy, and who? That's him there, and it's very intriguing actually. It's a sort of magical connection. So this is not people I didn't know this, but there's actually a website called Wiki Spooks, which deals with sort of people involved in intelligence and or suspicious characters. And this is his entry, which he proudly wears on his own Facebook page, which is kind of amusing. It says he's an author, journalist and presenter who started with the BBC, moving to commercial radio and television networks in the UK and Europe. He's an expert on aviation safety and airline operations, frequently lecturing, writing and advising international corporations. November 2015, the Daily Mail reported that Julian Bray's Lockerbie theory is now thought to be the most likely explanation for the Metro jet disaster, which was the one that was the Russian plane that flew over Egypt and was brought down. And they do Bray believes the bomb was hidden in luggage, blah blah blah, over Scotland to the Pan Am one. So he's brought out basically every time there's some sort of air disaster or something like that, which is interesting in itself, because there's certainly been enough conspiracy theories over things like MH370 and the Lufthansa one, which again I find very, very strange that this person is very high up. He's a CEO of Public Affairs Corporation, Leaden Hall Associates. Julian Bray was a consultant to international corporations, airlines and governments. He was for several years an international advisor to Romano Prodi, the former Italian Premier, that's the Prime Minister of Italy. He was twice Premier of Italy, and former European Commission President, and someone who attended the Bilderberg meetings, it should be said. And he was also a consultant to the Alitalia Group, a part of IRI, the Italian state holding company. He edited the international edition of the Airline Safety and Operations Service Manual and handled an air major incidents and victim support. He had advised several governments on rescue and recovery strategies and acted as an independent facilitator between organisations in the world media. He is well known as an expert witness and media commentator. Bray co-produced and directed TV series which reawakened interest in stage magic and illusions. Under the stage name of Ian Bray, which is an abbreviated version of his name, he became a full member of the Magician Magic Circle Society and is a performing member of Equity, the Actors Union. He became the life member of the National Union of Journalists in January 2012. So yeah, it's interesting that there's a whole magic thing. I should just touch on that. You know, the Masonic groups. You've got people like James Randi, you may know, a massive debunker. People like Penn and Teller. Darren Brown here in England, and they poo-poo the paranormal and any of these sort of subjects. So you could say that that's how he knows the magician, through that. And I do find it quite sinister that someone who's so high up with connections with the Italian Prime Minister would actually be involved in the alien autopsy. And I did message him about a few weeks ago, and strangely got no reply. It's very convenient how I write to these people, such as Gareth Watson, and send them 20 questions to answer, and then they say, oh, you know, I accidentally deleted it, and I'll reply back to them, and yeah, nothing. So if there's not some conspiracy to cover it, why are they not contacting me? You know, what are they hiding, basically? One brief thing I want to mention before we come to the end is the ATS Cameraman story, which you can see that's above top secret, which was an intriguing story of someone who claimed to have known the alien autopsy cameraman. And that was someone called Bernard Zalman, which is interesting because he had a record company in that Ohio area of Cleveland, where allegedly the cameraman's son was living. So it's an interesting thing. You can go onto the actual pub top secret page for more information, just because no one's ever really pinned down who that guy was, and obviously he would be dead by now because he would have been 82, I think, in 95, so he'd be long gone. But obviously he's got his son and family, and so there are people who know full well what the reality of this story is. Just going back to the idea that was a false nose and stuff, I just don't buy it. I think it's another far-fetched story from the magician. He claims pictures of debris not seen in the footage, so this is all kind of interesting. You think, well, that's surely gives him some credibility if he's got some images that aren't actually in it. You know, how would he have access to that? Well, for me, I mean, he is working for an intelligence agency. He is, you know, he's been employed to sort of cover it up, so they would have access to at least these materials, so it's no big deal that, you know, he's big. I think his biggest claim is probably his best evidence is that he's got a sort of like a better quality version of the debris footage, not the alien autopsy. Funny enough, he shows the poor quality version of the alien autopsy, and doesn't seem to have access to the better quality alien autopsy, but he does have these sort of images of the debris footage, which, you know, says, well, how would I have access to this? But no, I smell a rat here. I mean, because he's doing, for me, he would have been given this information, obviously, to bring the cover up to counter, you know, what actually happened. And he could have been given, he would have been given the original materials and information that no one else is privy to. So the other big thing for me that this was a cover-up was the idea, the claim that Greg Simmons was the guy with the holding the debris footage, and that's a picture of his Facebook page. I sort of tried to contact him, but again, no reply. So the claim what I'm making here is that these hands are quite distinctive, and your hands don't grow after, you know, this soldier, however old he would be, you know, these are very distinctive. So if you're going to prove the alien autopsy was a hoax, then surely it's just a case of showing Greg Simmons' hands and then matching them up with the alien autopsy footage, because then you could say, well, job done, you know. And it's like when I talk to the magician about this, he says, oh, I'll do it on all my own good time and all this stuff, and it's like he never sort of, and I just think, well, I was hoping to see something like that at the alien autopsy talk in Leicester Square, but it's never forthcoming. And you know, like I said, like the Gareth Watson photo again for me is bogus. So that's my humorous still waiting for evidence that he faked the alien autopsy, which, you know, like I say, wasn't forthcoming at the Leicester Square theatre. I mean, you might want to see for yourself. Go over to Sheffield if you can get down there. But for £30, I was thinking, you know, it's nothing I hadn't heard already before, and I just thought, you know, it seems very elaborate that you can put on a talk in Leicester Square for like huge expense. You have to ask who's funding someone to do a talk in Leicester Square, and whose interest is it, and who's backing him, and what's going to happen next. So kind of the conclusions then is that the alien autopsy is real, the alien autopsy is fake. They're both elements of truth and deception. Was it released by a pro-disclosure group to gauge the reaction of the general public, as some claim? I propose there must be some truth to it, as such a concerted effort was put into trying to say it was a hoax without any real evidence. And also there's been no attempt to recreate it. If it can be recreated, and you know, with the props, surely that can be done. You know, that would convince a lot of people. And if on such an amazing piece of footage, is it not strange that only one person wants to talk about it, which is basically the magician? His team, he says, oh, they, he won't talk. John Humphreys, and he seems like, he looks scared, to be honest. They all look scared, as they did, look very scared on the Aim of the Home. They all look like, whether that was intentional to make them look, like they're lying, but they just come across as totally lying, basically. And he's sort of controlling the information. He's the spokesperson. He's the only one talking. I mean, there was claims, obviously, that his brother was involved, and I haven't been able to contact him. I saw his sister at the Leicester Square talk, but she was apparently away, when he was filming it in '95, so she doesn't know whether, what the deal is. I just don't believe it, I don't buy it for a minute. So it was kind of, for me, a similar tactic used with the crop circle. We talked about crop circles a little bit earlier, about, Reg Presley and Colin Andrews, and very much a type of similar discrediting of the crop circle phenomenon was used, where, it got out and it maybe got too big, and they had to sort of cancel it. They had to sort of give out a version saying, oh, okay, go back to sleep. It wasn't an alien autopsy. We haven't had crash UFOs and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's exactly the same technique. The fact it took them 11 years was, I think it was a massive breach, and they thought, how are we going to get around this one? How are we going to cover this one up? And it's easier to fool people when they're convinced them that they have been fooled, which is, I think Mark Twain cuts a comment, and it's funny that the magician used that for his own talk in Leicester Square, so I definitely used it on an alien autopsy talk before him, which is kind of amusing me. So I'm sort of saying that he's claiming that, he's fooled people, and it's easy, but I'm coming from the other angle, that it's easy to fool people that they've been fooled that it was a hoax, basically. So kind of, I have been in correspondence with the magician over a couple of years, and we do sort of cross swords a lot. And I don't think he really appreciates me at all, really, exposing this and bringing it to light. But it has to be done. I don't think you should let anyone tell you or something is true or false without first looking into yourself. It is, obviously, by the time it's taking us over 2 hours to get through some of the nuances, and there's still a lot of more information which I'm still researching bits and pieces. Things are still coming to light. You might find it kind of ironic that the anagram of Ray Santilli is a saintly liar. So, does this imply that, he was legit? And if you watch those interviews, he does look very serious and very sincere. I don't believe he was a liar. I think he was got at. I think he was made to change his story, but also to keep some credibility. And now he's involved in some fake feud where we see the next move in the chessboard happen, which will probably be possibly an alien a lie detector test in America apparently next year, which is what I've been hearing, which is sinister in itself, going to America to do it. Like I say, they'll just present the story that either crucifying Ray as being a liar or whatever, and just put an end to it all. But so you want to know more? There's some books I would recommend. Well, Philip Mantle did a book about the alien autopsy, which I'd recommend. Came out a couple of years ago, an updated version with some of the claims of the magician, if you believe that. But I would say I'd prefer the original '96 book. I think it came out, Beyond Roswell, Michael Hesman, Philip Mantle, which you can get literally a couple of pounds or dollars, whatever, from online. Some good photos in there, which some of them I've used in my presentation today. And that's my Facebook page. So if you have got an interest in the alien autopsy and you want to know more, go on to Facebook. You don't have to be, if you don't want to be a member, you can view it without being a member. It's not a secret group or anything. We've got some of the prominent researchers, Neil Morris, Mr. Bayat, Michael Hesman's even come out of retirement a bit and adds a few pieces. They've got Ed Gurman, the crash retrieval site, who's found, I believe, the crash site. So there is research still going on. It's something that needs to be talked about, and we'll see what happens next. But I really appreciate you for tuning in today and watching this live event, and if the recorded version if you're watching back. And keep an eye on this subject, because it won't go away in the foreseeable future. And just maybe there's a piece of the puzzle that's missing, and it will come to light. And it could come from any direction. It might be a relative of the cameraman. It may be a piece of information that they've missed out. Certainly, I think you can call out the magician on a whole host of things, and that would be a good opportunity maybe to have a debate with him, maybe on one of the radio blog shows. So yeah, keep an eye on the subject, and hopefully we'll get closer to the truth. And just want to thank you once again for tuning in for what has been a very long talk. By my usual standards, an hour and a half, and I'm sorry about the video earlier on, but thank you for watching, and keep watching Miles's work. He does a great job for the bases, and he's been doing that for a number of years, and I appreciate Miles for giving me the opportunity to speak here today from Devizes, Wiltshire.